Shalom, I'm Chris Shoemaker, also known as Rabbi Yehuda ben Shomer. Today I want to talk to you about the Apostle Paul, or as we like to say in Hebrew, Rav Shaul. He's probably the most controversial and misunderstood New Testament character in Scripture. He wrote the majority of the letters in the Brit Chadesha, the Renewed Covenant. And many have taught and proclaimed and believe that the Apostle Paul, Rav Shaul, preached and taught against the law of Moses, against the Torah. And I think that if the Apostle Paul was alive today, he would just kind of be pulling out his beard saying, no, you've got me all wrong. You've misunderstood me. He's probably doing 360s in his grave right now. And he's a very difficult rabbi of the Scriptures to understand. People can easily take his writings out of context because, number one, they don't understand the Hebrew and Greek behind what he was saying. Second of all, they don't understand the context or the circumstances behind his letters and why he wrote them and the actual situations that he was addressing. And Peter, whose Hebrew name is Kepha, he kind of confirms this. In 2 Peter 3, 15 through 16, it says, "And account that the long-suffering of our Lord is salvation, even as our beloved brother Paul, also according to the wisdom given unto him, hath written unto you, as also in all his epistles, speaking in them of these things, in which are some things hard to understand." So here Peter is saying, look, I know that Paul is a deep man. You know, he's deep, he's mystical, he's spiritual, and sometimes it's hard to understand exactly what he's saying because they're so deep. "In which some things are hard to be understood, which they that are unlearned and unstable wrest, as they do also the other Scriptures unto their own destruction." So here Peter is confirming that people have taken Paul's letters, his words, his teachings, out of context because they're unlearned and they're unstable. They don't understand the linguistics or the culture or the circumstances or the context behind what Paul is saying, and therefore they take what he says out of context. So let's look into the Scriptures and let's see who the Apostle Paul, Rav Shaul, really was, and if he really did teach against Torah. So, first of all, we learned that he's a Roman citizen, according to Acts chapter 22, verses 22 through 29. And in Acts 21:39 and 22:3, we learn that he is a citizen of Tarshish. And he's also known as a true Jew, according to Philippians 3:5, which Paul says, "I was circumcised the 8th day of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as touching the law, a Pharisee." So basically, Paul's giving his pedigree here, his ancestry. He's like, hey, when I was born, I was circumcised the 8th day according to the law of Moses. I'm from Israel. I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews, and as far as the Torah is concerned, I'm considered a Pharisee. So he says, touching the law, a Pharisee. So he still believed as Pharisees believed. He just wasn't hypocritical like a lot of Pharisees were. Romans 11:1 says, "I say then, hath God cast away his people? God forbid! For I also am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin." And Acts 23:6 says, "But when Paul perceived that the one part were Sadducees and the other part were Pharisees, he cried out into the council, 'Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope of the resurrection of the dead, I am called in question.'" Did you get what Paul is saying here? He didn't say, I was a Pharisee just because I believe that Jesus, Yeshua, is the Messiah of Israel. I didn't change my religious affiliation. He didn't say I was a Pharisee. He says, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. So I think that's pretty awesome. We learn more about the Apostle Paul that that he come from a very well-to-do family, according to Acts 22 through 29, and especially focusing on verse 28. We learned that Paul had a family fortune. To be a Roman citizen, which was extremely expensive back then, his family must have been very well-to-do for them to purchase Roman citizenship. Not only that, but we learn about his childhood education, which also alludes to Paul coming from a very well-to-do family. In Acts chapter 22, verse 3, he says, I I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel. You're saying, okay, so what? Gamaliel. But if you're Jewish and you were raised Jewish, you know who Gamaliel is. He's a very, very famous rabbi whose writings are found in the Jewish compendium called the Talmud. So he sat at Gamaliel's feet, and we learned that Paul was basically, because he was studying under Gamaliel, he was in line to be part of the prestigious court of Israel called the Sanhedrin. So he says, I sat at the feet of Gamaliel and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers. So this isn't talking about the law of Moses. This is going beyond the law of Moses. This is talking about the law of the fathers, which means the customs and the traditions of the Jewish people based on the Torah. So he knew how to keep all the customs and traditions. He knew all the halakha interpretation and such, and was jealous toward God, as ye are all to this day. So he was a very zealous for Torah, very zealous for the customs and traditions of his forefathers. He was proud to be a Jew. And he was zealous for Judaism, according to Galatians 1, 13 through 14. For ye have heard of my conversation in past time in the Jews' religion, how that beyond measure I persecuted the church of God, and wasted it, and profited in the Jews' religion above many my equals in my own nation, being more exceedingly zealous of the traditions of my fathers. So again, he was zealous to be a Jewish person, a traditional Orthodox Jewish person. And matter of fact, the Pharisees, the descendants of the Pharisees, are actually the Orthodox Jews that we know today. So in Acts 23:6, we find that the Apostle Paul, Rav Shaul, becomes a believing Jewish Pharisee. It says, but when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other part Pharisees, he cried out into the council, men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, and the hope of the resurrection of the dead I am called in question. So he was also zealous for his Jewish brethren, according to Romans 10:1. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. So we also read and find in Acts 28:17 that the Apostle Paul, Rav Shaul, was Torah obedient even after being changed by his encounter with Messiah Yeshua. After accepting Yeshua as the Jewish Messiah, he still kept Torah. It says, and it came to pass that after 3 days, Paul called the chief of the Jews together, and when they were come together, he said unto them, men and brethren, though I have committed nothing against my people or the customs of our fathers, yet I was delivered prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans. So in continuing on in Acts 21:17 through 26, he says, and when we were come to Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly, and the day following, Paul went in with us unto Jacob, James, and all the elders were present. And when he had saluted them, he declared particularly what the things God had wrought among the Gentiles by his ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord and said unto him, thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are which believe, and they are all zealous for the law. Wow, the apostle said that the Jewish believers were zealous for the Torah, that thousands of Jews have come to believe that Yeshua is the Messiah, and that they are zealous for the Torah. They're zealous for the law. They didn't do away with the law. They didn't say it's been done away with. They didn't stop keeping and observing the law. They were zealous for it. So right here, the apostles kind of got wind of this lie, this rumor that the apostle Paul was teaching the Gentiles not to keep Torah or to go against Torah, that it's been abolished. So he's defending himself here. And it says, and they are informed of thee that thou teachest all Jews which are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, neither walk after the customs. So the apostles are saying, okay, this is great. This ministry that you're doing among the Gentiles and they're getting saved and come to Messiah, that's wonderful. That's great, Paul. But we hear that you're teaching the Jews to not keep the law, even going so far as to say don't circumcise your children or keep the customs and traditions of Judaism. Going on, verse 22, what is it therefore? The multitude must needs come together, for they will hear that thou art come. Do therefore this that we say, Okay, so basically the apostles are like, look, Paul, we believe you. We know that you're not teaching against Torah, but we need to prove to the people that you are still Torah observant and you're teaching the Jewish believers to continue to keep the law. So to prove this point, this is what you're supposed to do. We have 4 men which have a vow on them, meaning a Nazirite vow. Take them and purify thyself with them, and be at charges with them, that they may shave their heads. That's how we know it's a Nazirite vow, because at the end of a Nazirite vow, you shaved your head and gave a sacrifice at the temple. And all may know that those things wherefore they were informed concerning thee are nothing, but that thou thyself also walkest orderly and keepest the law. So they're saying, take this Nazirite vow, complete this Nazirite vow. Once you shave your head and do the sacrifice at the temple with these other 4 men that are taking on a Nazirite vow upon themselves, that will prove to the people that you still keep the law. You still keep the Torah. You're still teaching others to keep the law and the Torah, because why else would you go to the temple if you said it's been done away with and is obsolete? Verse 25, as touching the Gentiles which believe, we have written and concluded that they observe no such thing, save only that they keep themselves from things offered to idols, from blood, and from strangled, and from fornication. According to the rabbis and sages, these 4 laws that they gave the Gentiles were starter laws. It's called the heart of the Torah. Basically, it's against idolatry. It's to help the Gentiles make a clean break from their pagan past and their pagan roots and their pagan worship, which involved a lot of sexual promiscuity, religious sexual promiscuity, temple prostitutes, food sacrifice to idols, drinking blood, etc. So all these things are prohibited in the Torah. So they told the Gentiles to do that, because in Acts 15, we read that the apostles said that we're not going to worry about the rest of the Torah right now. As long as they keep these 4 laws, they're good. They can fellowship with us and they can worship with us, and the Jews don't have to worry about becoming ritually unclean or whatnot because of what the Gentiles are doing. We're not going to worry about the rest of the laws right now, because we know from Sabbath to Sabbath, every Sabbath they're going to learn about the law. They're going to slowly learn how to keep the law themselves. So, verse 26, then Paul took the men, and the next day, purifying himself with them, entered into the temple to signify the accomplishment of the day of purification, until that an offering should be offered for every one of them. So, we clearly see that the Apostle Paul was a Jew through and through, that he didn't teach or preach against the law of Moses. He didn't teach or preach against the Torah or against the commandments, that he taught the Jews and Jewish believers to obey the law, to keep the law, because that is the whole foundation of Scripture. That's the whole foundation of everything of what Jesus taught and said. And so when somebody says that Paul, Rav Shaul, taught against the Torah, taught against the law, they're clearly misunderstanding him, as Peter said that many have already done, and they're taking what he has said grossly out of context. So if you come up with any interpretation reading Romans, Galatians, or any other letter, Hebrews, whatever letter that Paul wrote, and you take his words to mean that the law has been done away with, and that keeping the law is a bondage, you have abolished the law yourself, as a rabbi would say to a yeshiva student who got the interpretation wrong of a passage. So you're misinterpreting the passage. We have to come up with that. We have to realize and see that there is a gross misinterpretation. We are translating, or we are interpreting Paul's words with a Western bias, because we're already assuming that the law has been done away with. But if you keep in the context and understand that the law is still for today, that it has not been done away with, and you read the Apostle Paul's words in that context, you'll clearly see that Rav Shaul did not teach against the Torah, or that the Torah has been done away with or is obsolete. Basically, if you read carefully, when you read about the Apostle Paul and you talk about the curse of the law, what is the curse of the law? The curse of the law is death. What has been nailed to the tree by Yeshua? It's not the law. It's the curse of the law that's been nailed to the tree, according to the Scriptures, which is the death penalty. The death penalty of the law has been nailed to the cross. That's what's been done away with, is the curse of the law. So we've got to look at these things that Paul said and these phrases that Paul said and understand them in a Jewish and a Hebraic context and understand what he was saying and why he was saying it. To be under the law was kind of a short way of saying being under the penalty of the law. When he says we're no longer under the law, we're no longer under the penalty of the law, which is the death penalty. We're no longer under the death penalty of the law. The works of the law. If the law had its full work, we would die because we're no longer under that death penalty because Yeshua took the penalty of death, the penalty of the law upon himself on the cross and conquered it. So it's not the law that's been done away with, it's the death penalty that's been done away with it. That's what the curse of the law is. That's what the works of the law is. To the end of the law is death, if it works in you. And that's what being under the law meant, being under the death penalty of the law. We're no longer subject to those things. Why is Canada and the United States considered free countries? It's because of their laws. Because we're under those laws, and those laws permit us to be free. They allow us to be free. We practice these laws. We're free from tyranny. We're free from all these evil things. There's order. There's order in Torah, order in law. And God has a kingdom. And God is a king. And if God is a king and has a kingdom, he must have a kingdom law in order to run the kingdom properly. And to have things orderly. And even Paul said everything should be done in decency and in beseder and in order. So we've got to understand these phrases that curse of the law, under the law, these things. We've got to understand their true context and not just flippantly assume this biased interpretation that has been perpetuated over the years regarding these phrases and these very issues. So as the passages that I just read, we can clearly see that the Apostle Paul, Rav Shaul, did not teach or preach against Torah, that he was not against the law. He hasn't done away with the law, but he was a true Hebrew, a true Jew, a true Benjamite. Not only that, he was a rabbi, but not only that, he was a Pharisee. He never stopped being a Pharisee just because he believed that Yeshua is the Messiah. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this segment. Rav Shaul, Jewish friend or fiend? Well, I hope you see that he was a friend of the Jews. He's a Jewish friend, even though his calling was to reach the Gentiles. Shalom.